And welcome back to chapter 13 of Positivity Bias. This chapter is all about rehearsal for redemption. And for me, the first story that's shared here is to me one of the most powerful stories. Um, I think it's because of the topic, it's because of the people involved. I think it's because of the depth of the pain involved. To me, that this is what speaks out about this one. What do you guys know about Eli Wiesel? What's your knowledge of
I've read Night. I never read The Gates of the Forest.
and you read Night in English, right?
Yes, in English.
As if
If I read it in Yiddish, I wouldn't have understood anything.
yeah, it's a shorter version, the English version of it. Zev, what do you know about Eli Wiesel?
Same, pretty much the same.
Mhm. I lived in California for years, and he was very much involved in the. Was he? I think when I think of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, I also think of Eli Wiesel, and I guess in for the same topics for the same reasons, but I don't remember if he was actually involved there so much or not. But
Well, I always think of him as a writer who survived the Holocaust, and yes, it is his experiences in a novel form.
and he came. By the way, Jeff, with your head down and your cap on, we don't even see you. So tilt it
Yeah,
back.
well, that's because I refer back to my book, so
Yeah.
I'll
So
pop it up.
Eli Wiesel was actually in court a number of times as a resource expert on Hasidic life and Hasidic dynasties. So he's been an expert in Jewish history and Jewish concepts, but specifically in the Hasidic world, which is an interesting part. But he was called to court to testify in a number of cases about these things, and his testimony was very valuable. So very, very special character. But as the story goes back in here, so Eli Wiesel, in his memoirs, The Gates of the Forest, he talks about his first meeting with the Rebbe back in the 1960s, early 1960s. And I don't want to say here, one-on-one yechidison, private audiences with the Rebbe. There were so many of them that the Rebbe would go late into the night, and there were always the maskiras, the secretaries, who were always trying to keep these conversations brief and get on to the next person. So they were, constantly trying to encourage people to move forward. But back in the early 1960s, when the Eli Wiesel went for his private audience with the Rebbe, they were there for hours, and in their conversations through the night, obviously the pivotal question was, concerning how do you believe in God after the Holocaust, and the Rebbe kept asking Eli Wiesel, what do you want from me? What can I help you with?
Yeah,
And
well, Wiesel said nothing at first, but
numerous times, right. But as the hours went on and it got into the wee hours of the morning, Eli Wiesel came to a point where he realized, you know what? You asked me what I wanted, and I said I expect nothing, but I want you to make me cry, which is a powerful statement because really, if you read the stories from Eli Wiesel and you know from the book Nacht, the initial Yiddish version, but also there are a lot of stories in the English version of Night. Um, he he was so traumatized by his father's murder in Buchenwald, in the concentration of the death camp, that it shut down all of his emotions. He shut everything down. And for years and years, he continued to function, but without access to his emotions. And so when he asked the Rebbe, I want to make you cry, it was a deep plea. And it's important to know that crying and is an important part of the healing process. And so the Rebbe doesn't diminish that aspect of this at all. But the Rebbe's answer to him was, that's not enough. I will make you sing. I will teach you to sing.
Yeah, it's the positivity of the Rebbe coming through there again.
Yeah. It's not enough to get your emotions back just for the purpose of the crying in the morning. No, you got to see past that. You got to see past that. And you got to see the ultimate goal is not in the catharsis, but the ultimate goal is to live again and to have all of those things, including the focus on the joy. And sorrow must never swallow up the joy of living. And I think this story epitomizes a generation. For so many people, the focus was on never again, which is important, but that's not enough.
Yeah, it goes on to, what do you call it? Quote Rabbi Sachs. Yeah, not related to me. You know, what holds us? You know, what do we Jews have in common post World War II? And that's everybody hates us. And the Lubavitcher Rabbi, he saw it a little differently. So, yeah,
Rebbe's vision is what
kinda like
unites
that.
us.
God loves us.
God loves us. That's what unites us. God loves us. Yeah. Zev, I wanted to get your insights on this one because you've got a personal background in this as well.
Yeah,
Well, several different perspectives. One, from the standpoint of my own personal experience growing up, my parents lost, between the two of them, 22 relatives, and consequently lost a lot of faith with it. And they never talked about anything. It was very difficult for me to witness growing up. And from the standpoint, from a physician standpoint, you know, I would always tell my trainees that if they lost their feeling speaking with a family, they should never lose their feeling or their emotion. Because if they did, then it was time to get out. They became that insensitive to the patient's families, not just the patients themselves, but to their families, then they should stop practicing medicine. People, seems to me, a lot of people harden themselves. They make themselves devoid of emotion, and to some degree, you have to do that to remain objective when you're trying to take care of someone. But you can't lose your emotion completely.
And how about
I always had to have empathy dealing with people on the police force too. I mean, and they're going through some hard times, and you know, you try and think of how is this affecting them, and it just helps. And
We're trained in medicine to deal with the patients, not so much with their families. But you have to remember they're the ones left behind, and you really have to help them along in their journey as well.
See, we lost people in the Holocaust too, but I guess I didn't know them, and I don't think even my parents really had a lot of attachment to them. These were people that they corresponded with, but they really didn't know them because they'd never been back to the old country. On the other hand, my great grandparents, yes, they were affected by the Holocaust.
These are my grandparents that I never had growing up.
Yeah,
yeah, it's very personal that way.
I know on my dad's side we lost both sides of the family. We lost a lot of relatives, but nobody ever really spoke about it that much, about the people they had lost. And you would think they would want to talk about some of the good memories. They didn't.
The pain can easily swallow the good and the pleasant memories. The pain can easily swallow because it's so overwhelming. But I think that's part of what the Rebbe is focusing on here is we have to get past that. We're not minimizing the pain. We're not minimizing the tragedy. We're not in any way, shape, or form, taking away from how devastating it is. But you can't move forward with that. It's too painful. It doesn't move forward and create new life and fulfill the purpose of our mission and things like that. It can stop us. It's, in a sense, it's when we talk about the difference between atzrus and merirus, when we talk about when someone is depressed versus someone who's upset. Someone who's depressed, it steals your energy. But someone who's upset about something can be motivated into action to doing something. And so I hear the same thing. Anything that the negative feelings can just pull everything down. How do we move forward? I think that's the beauty of the Rebbe's focus here. Is I will teach you yet how to sing. And the focus on so much of our Jewish history has been, it's difficult to be a Jew, right? And there's truth to that if you focus on the negative, but you can also see the other side of that. It's good to sein a Yid, there's all the goodness and the beauty of it. And the Rebbe's focus is always on look to the good part, focus on the positive part, and to focus going there,
And just go into the next paragraph of this chapter, and I was kind of hoping that the author would give us a little epilogue about whether did that work or not.
The Zain good that says good to sein a Yid.
How good it is to be a Jew.
Yes,
Just-
it works. Yes, but it's an effort. It's not automatic. Like betochen, like trust. It's a work in progress. It takes constant effort, and
you have to have the energy to do it.
Yes.
It's I heard Rabbi Meir Lal on Yom HaShoah at Auschwitz say that the family members you lost leave a hole in your heart that you'll never fill.
It makes it really hard to go on.
So I think for my parents, it was hard for them to continue for themselves, but they sought opportunities for the children, for us.
So they weren't able for themselves to see past and focus on positive and everything, but they made sure, I want to say they made damn sure that it would be there for the kids. Yeah. And that's hard because you're losing you're I guess living a dual life,
Well, I'll say this, if it weren't for the Holocaust, I don't think my father's side of the family, the ones that survived, went to Israel, with the exception of the ones that had been here already. And they wouldn't have been Israelis if it wasn't for what happened. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm just saying that, Israel came out of this. It was the phoenix that rose from the ashes.
Right, but I think there's a challenge when we talk about Israel rose from the ashes. That's small consolation.
Is it worth the cost? Yeah.
And,
Well, yeah, I
and the Rebbe could never justify that as sufficient for the loss. It was never an acceptable v'chein, therefore. It never was a sufficient. No.
I'm not saying it was a good trade.
Right. It's not a good trade. We understand that. We acknowledge that did come out of it. But in a sense, to put it in a crass way, that's no excuse. We one of the things I look forward to in the Geula with Mashiach is when we focus on hashgacha pratis, divine providence, and every once in a while you actually get to see the divine providence. You get to see how something that felt bad at the moment actually turned out to be a really good thing, and it brings a little joy to your life, right? When you're watching for divine providence and you see it, there's this little smile or sweetness that comes to that, the joy that comes to being able to recognize the divine providence of something. And that's an amazing thing. It blows me away to just imagine when Mashiach comes and we look back on our painful history and from the divine perspective actually get to see how, it's hard even to say these words, but how good it all was. When we see with God's eyes the good, and the whole thing is flipped over. It's said that Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. So I remember someone saying that we don't have two 25-hour fast days on the calendar. Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, if you knew what was going on Yom Kippur, who could eat? If you really understood what's going on. And Tisha B'Av, if you really knew what happened, who could eat?
Going to read about one of those this Shabbos.
Yeah. So grasping how difficult Tisha B'Av is, how disastrous Tisha B'Av really is, and then learning from the Talmud that in Mashiach's time it's going to be a yontif. It's going to be a holiday. That the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple and all the good that was hidden deep within that, it'll actually be a Yom Tov. I can't wait to see the divine providence, the good in all the stuff that feels so bad, right? But that's,
as a soldier, I could eat almost anytime, anywhere, and trust me, I have. It's even as a cop. I mean, you see a lot of death, and you see some bad things, and still eating is good.
right. So there'll come that time, and I think the Rebbe's vision was always there. I can't explain today. I can't explain the pain. There's no human logic for it. But I know that comes Mashiach, it'll be there. And so I think that Rebbe is always trying to take us to that bright future, be excited about that bright future, feel that bright future, sense that bright future, come into that light, because from there, it's all good.
That probably explains the next two stories then, because I was kind of figuring, how does singing and whistling relate to this?
So you got to understand, Zalman Jaffe, God bless him, Zalman Jaffe was a chassid of the Rebbe from London who had a very fascinating relationship with the Rebbe. He was a businessman, a successful businessman, and in some ways, he was an absolute chassid. As he says himself, I'm a soldier, right? But he had almost this buddy relationship in some ways with the Rebbe that was unique, absolutely unique. And so he tells this story back in 1970. It was the first night of Shavuos, and he was actually invited to the Rebbe's table. And he was eating by the Rebbe's table. His family was very close with the Rebbe and his wife. And they were eating dinner, and Zalman Jaffe, he starts to comment of how come there weren't any. There was a particular niggin that's sung in some places on Shavuos that's an uplifting niggin, and it's not a Chabad thing. That's not the Chabad style. Chabad is always much more intellectual and much more deep and much more somber.
That's how I remember the Chabad from the 70s too, because I used to get drafted to Minions I remember a lot of singing.
And that's how it was. But Zalman Jaffe, he kind of said, "Hey, how come?" And the Rebbe said, "I didn't see it in the Rebbe's shul, my father-in-law's shul, so it's not the tradition." And and then the Rebbe turns to him and he says, "But this is your fault." Zalman is like, I'm just a soldier. I just take orders." So the Rebbe smiles and says, "Okay, so I'm commanding you. Sing." Zalman Jaffe uses the example of Nachshon ben Aminadav. Nachshon ben Aminadav was like when everybody was at the Red Sea and the waves are pounding and the Egyptians are coming from behind and there's nowhere to go. And Moses is saying, "Go, go." And everyone is standing there like a lump on a log. And Nachshon ben Aminadav, he walks into the sea. His ankles, his knees, his waist, it literally gets up to here, and then it breaks. But only when he's fully committed. Then it breaks, right? So Zalman says that's what it felt like to be the only one in all of 770 singing a joyous niggin. And
it was better the second day, as he said. It was better the next day.
yeah, well,
But that episode at the Reed Sea also shows us that we can't always expect miracles to happen passively. We have to take the initiative.
absolutely. We have to take the initiative. We have to do something. Right. Absolutely. We have to take the initiative, and God responds in kind. And part of that initiative, as I'm teaching this other class on Shara B'tochen, the gate of trust, right? And in the gate of trust, he talks about that when we fully trust in God, when we absolutely trust in God, and we're calm and fully trusting that it's all going to be good, then God responds in kind. But you got to start. You got to lead, right? You got to create the initiative, right? So here, Zalman Jaffe starts the singing, and of course, then everybody else starts joining in by the second day because apparently it's okay, and from that point on, because if that's what happens in 770, the Rebbe's shul in Brooklyn, then all the Chabad houses follow suit. So around the world, now we start singing, and that's Zalman Jaffe, God bless him, right? And I think that's part of the beauty of the Rebbe's leadership was to realize that what worked in the past is not necessarily going to work in the future. And a new era, a new time, new situations require a new way of doing things. And in this particular case, the Rebbe leans on the power of joy. Joy, that Simcha Paretz Geder, that joy breaks through all boundaries. And the idea that through the joy, we can change everything, And again, it's that joy that you can see, like, the Rebbe, it's like he sees that beautiful future and he wants us to see it too, and he's trying to take us there. But that first Fabringen, where this was 1971, it was Purim, and Rabbi Meir Abehsera, he's a Sephardi guy. He was there. He's a tall guy, and he used to sit behind. He used to stand behind the Rebbe's right shoulder, a little off, not right behind where all the seniors of the community sit, right? But off to the right, he would be there. And he tells us about at the Fabringen, the Rebbe was turning to him and doing this, right? And Meir was like, "What? What?" He can't mean whistle because that's like crude. That's so unbecoming. And for a Gadol B'Dorah, the leader of the generation, someone to saying, "Hey, whistle." It could, but he did this to the Rebbe like with a question, like whistle, and the Rebbe's face lit up. Yeah. And he lit into it. He lit into it with all of the gusto that Rebbe told him. That Rebbe commanded him, right? He lit into it, and then others joined in. And I've seen it so many times at Fabringens when the Rebbe would turn the Meir Abehsera and he would just do this, and the whole of 770 would the sound was deafening, the whistling. But
I didn't even know that that was something that was in the Torah, whistling.
yeah, so that's the thing is that people started, a publisher put someone caught a picture of that at the Fabringen and published it, and people started saying how unbecoming and how crude and and all these things, and then no one said anything. So eventually, a few months later, so the Rebbe points out at Fabringen, months have gone by. I expected someone would bring up a source of whistling, a Torah source for the whistling. No one did. So okay, so he did it himself. He brought up the sources and he started bringing examples from the Torah of the idea of whistling, and that whistling is a sign of uninhibited, unreserved joy, breaking boundaries. Just
We make lots of other noise at Purim, especially every time the name Haman is read.
yes, we do. But this wasn't just at a Purim Fabringen. This was now at other Fabringens. It was going on. Unbridled joy is unbecoming of royalty. The Rebbe even brought an example of King David HaMelech, when they brought the Ark, the Iron Kodesh, when they brought the Ark of the Covenant back from having been captured by the Pelishtim, they brought it back, and here's the king of Israel doing somersaults in front of the iron. His wife
thought it was unbecoming. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember his wife thought it was unbecoming. I remember reading that in
Michel.
Yeah. And but yeah, that's the thing, is it, what does it mean unbecoming? It means there's this level of seichel, of intellect, the way you do things intellectually, the way things ought to be done. And if you go outside that channel, it's a shtush, it's a nonsense. But when something is that joyous, it leads to shtush, it leads to joy, right? There's so many people on Simchas Torah who dance with the Torahs very reservedly. It's a very solemn march with the Torahs. The Chabad way.
I went to the Kotel last time I was in Israel. I'm still waiting to go back, a year and a half, Simchas Torah. Last time I was there. And we went at night, which would have been the second day for us here. Right. And I was dancing with the Torahs at the Kotel. It's nothing. It's beautiful.
And would you say that it's constraint celebration or unbridled joy?
No constraint. No constraint whatsoever. There were dozens of Torahs there. You could pick from the Safar Torahs with their beautiful cases and Ashkenazim Torah. It was just beautiful.
Yeah.
And it was at night anyway. It was just a totally different atmosphere.
Unbridled joy.
Yeah.
But you see, it's when there's a path of normal, and then there's a shtus, there's a nonsense. That shtus, that nonsense, can go towards negative things, but that shtus can also go higher than tam v'das, higher than wisdom and understanding, higher than what is considered a norm and appropriate. And when David saw the Iron Kodesh coming home, unbridled joy and doing somersaults and everything. The same thing, that Rebbe is using that energy to bring out positive things. And so whistling was an example of this unbridled joy that was being tapped. So there's a comment here that Rebbe concludes, when it's a matter of increasing Jews' desire and joy in performing a mitzvah, even if there's only a slight chance that 1%, that one person present, rather, even so present, only one person present will have a personal geula, a personal redemption from his Yetzer Hara, and actually join in and be joyous, even if it's only a remote possibility, how much it's worth it. It's worth it. Even more so when we actually see that in certain instances, there are Jews that who, through such whistling, experienced a fundamental change in their spiritual expression from one extreme to another. And the Rebbe said, in our situation, when the whistling was going on, there were Jews present who resolved from that very moment they would increase in their enthusiastic and fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs. So it was effective. It actually made a difference. And in such a case, Maimonides rules that you need to behave just like David HaMelech did, dancing and prancing with all of one's energy. Especially when the whistling was not a mistake, but an actual plan that actually worked to arouse and reveal the hidden good in a number of Yidden, of Jews. And through this whistling, we shall soon have the fulfillment of the prophet of the promise that on that day Hashem will whistle and gather the Jewish people from the ends of the earth, as it is said, and you will gather one by one in a way that no Jew will remain in exile. May this happen with kindness and mercy and soon. And it was cute because on the way out from the Fabringen, when the Rebbe explained all this, he turned to the publisher he saw on his way out, and he said, "You brought out that Devar Torah. You're the one who created that by publishing the picture."
So, does your shul is there whistling here and there?
Rarely.
Clapping, lots of clapping, but not whistling.
But even clapping on Shabbos has its questions.
Right.
But when it's associated with joy, 100% permissible.
Yeah, we'll do that with certain songs, yeah.
Especially when it comes to Simchas Torah. Especially when it comes to Simchas Torah. It's interesting because the Baal Shem Tov brought out an interesting question. We've always done, there's the responsibility that, that we should a Jew must strive to experience joy at all times. This was from the Baal Shem Tov. What was his point? That a person has to serve Hashem b'simcha, right? A person has to serve God with joy. So if you have to serve God with joy, but you have to.
Story, I see what you're doing.
Again?
You moved into the next story. Transition moment.
We have to serve God with joy. And since we have to serve God b'chol b'rachecha da'ehu, in all of our actions, you have to serve God. So everything has to be with joy. And the Baal Shem Tov explained that that's not just when you're doing a mitzvah. Because you have to, b'chol b'rachecha da'ehu, in all your ways you have to know God. You have to serve God when you're eating. You have to serve God when you're sleeping. You have to serve God in all the things that you do at work. And so, therefore, all of those things have to be done b'simcha, with joy. Not just in the religious matters, but in all of life, because all of life is a religious life. And so all of those things have to be done with absolute joy. And there comes the question of, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. There was a time when there's a commentary that says that punishments came because you did not serve God with joy. Is it because the activity wasn't done with joy, or because joy is not a part of your daily activity? In other words, the Baal Shem Tov is saying joyful has to be the way of life. That has to be the day-to-day attitude. And it comes back to that idea of, we talked about bitachon, of trust. If you know that there's a God in the world, and you know that nothing happens without God's involvement, and everything God does is good, then everything is good, then you have to be happy at all times. There was a chassid in 770, he doesn't bring the story here, but there's a chassid in 770 who was involved in helping the Rebbe when the Rebbe was able to bring his mother out of Europe after the Holocaust. And The Rebbe used to call him an endearing name. He used to call him my partisan. He's my partisan, right? And when this chassid, so every day we have, on normal days we have tachlin prayers that we say, asking God for forgiveness for all the things we've done wrong, right? But on joyous occasions, on Yom Tov and Shabbos, we don't say those things, right? On joyous occasions. And this chassid would not say tachlin when he was in 770. Shachar, Mincha, he would not say tachlin when he was visiting 770, when he was visiting the Rebbe.
It does shorten the davening.
Pardon?
It does shorten the davening.
It does shorten the davening, right? So, and he was a guy, and if you watch videos of 770 in the Fabringans, you look behind the Rebbe, not too far from where Meir Abehsera would stand. This guy was there, and he was both hands. He was both hands like this during the singing, right? That was the Rebbe's partisan. One time, the Rebbe was coming in or going out of the shul, and he saw him not happy. I won't say sad, but not happy. And the Rebbe stopped and looked at him, and he said in Yiddish, but he said, either you have to be besimcha always, or you have to say tachlin. So the personal attention from the Rebbe gave him another boost, and there he was again. So he was a guy who was constantly joyful in the times, and that's the mandate, really. That's the mandate for us, is to constantly be joyous and serve God with joy and optimism. And what we learn from this idea of we're coming towards the end of the chapter here, but the simcha parts together, that joy breaks through all boundaries. This is what we talk about in Shai B'tachim, the gates of trust, is that if you have that trust and you're happy, so God responds to that. I think it's the same way we talk about, when someone, have you ever heard of laughter therapy?
I think it's a joke. Couldn't help it. Sorry.
Good one. So in many assisted living communities, around the country and other places, there's a thing called laughter therapy. And all they do is they gather together and they laugh. And they just start to laugh. But once someone else is laughing, it's hard not to laugh. Right? And
there's in Israel now, a big thing that's my daughter is telling me, laughter yoga.
Yes, yeah, because it gets all of your kishkas moving, right?
Are you going to touch on that next little story about Joy and Null's harsh decrees? Because that was an interesting thing to me. I'm not a real believer.
So this is how it works. When you go to laughter therapy, there's someone who's the leader, and they just start laughing gently and tell everyone, do the same thing. and they start, even when the feeling isn't there, you start doing it. But as you do it more and more, it creates the feeling as well. So I'll share a story. Back in my yeshiva days, this would have been Tov Mem Aleph, 1981. I was in yeshiva. One of my friends, I think his father had passed away, so he was davening from the Amud. Every morning, breakfast, Shachris Mincha Marav, morning, afternoon, evening services, he would lead the services as part of his commemoration of his father's passing, and to be a schus, to bring merit to his father. Thursday nights in yeshiva is oftentimes a time of fabringen. Hasidim gather together, and if not with the Rebbe, or even if not with a mashpia, a teacher, then even Hasidim would get together and the Bachram would get together and they would bring and we'd have a few l'chaims and we'd share stories and we'd, work on ourselves a little bit. And Thursday night, there was a fabringen. By the time that dawn came, we were still drinking and we were still singing and we were still partying. And we realized at some point that if we go to bed now, Akiva's not going to wake up in time for a minyan. That is not going to happen. He's got to have a minyan. But hey, there's 10 of us here. There's exactly 10 of us right here. We could do this. So we made another l'chaim. We went down to the mikveh, came back up, said the morning blessings, put on our tefillin, and we started davening. We started davening. We're davening through. Akiva's at the Amud. He's leading the services. It comes to Baruch Hu, the middle of the services, before the Shema and Shema Esrei, it comes to Baruch Hu, and there's a Kaddish. Akiva starts to say the Kaddish. And he starts to giggle. And as he starts to giggle, it's contagious in the room. And throughout the rest of Shema and Shemona Esrei and the rest of the davening, there's giggling, there's outright laughter, it was so contagious. It was really a sight to behold. I'm glad we didn't have cell phone cameras in those days and catch videos of this. After the whole minyan was over, at the very last Kaddish, Akiva finishing the Kaddish, he steps 3 steps back. He says, Shalom b'mreimov, huyaz shalom aleinu, v'yalko yisrael, v'imru, amen. And then he looks up and he says, God, I hope you enjoyed this minyan because we sure did. But I think of that minyan because the laughter was so contagious. The joy was so contagious. And I truly believe that yes, it was shtus and it was nonsense, but there was a brotherly love there. There was a commitment that Akiva would have his minyan. It was just so beautiful and so special that I got to believe that God, maybe we were like toddlers goofing off and doing stupid things, but I got to believe he enjoyed it because it was just beautiful. It was just beautiful. And it's that joy, right? It's that joy that, and you've seen this as parents, right? When kids do something silly, but it makes you smile, right? And when your kids are laughing, it makes you smile. And even when you're the kid that comes up and is buttering you up because he's going to ask something, she's going to ask you something, right? And she's buttering you up, right? You're being played, right? But it's cute and you smile and you do it, right? You give in, right? Often. I'm blessed with, my wife and I are blessed with 6 daughters. And I'm telling you, they all got daddy wrapped around their finger. But that's the thing. And God does the same with us. When we're so happy, when we're so joyous, when we have absolute trust that God's going to do good stuff for us, he can't help but snicker. He can't help but laugh and grin. He can't help but smile and give into it and join the party. And that's what we're talking about here, is that if we serve God with joy, that optimism, that brings about a corresponding optimism from on high. The joy we create brings out joy on his part. And when you're joyous and you're happy, you give all kinds of stuff, all kinds of blessings and everything else. And so yes, that's the way we bring Mashiach. That's the way that we break down the gates of heaven. And there's a story in here about it's important to have the keys to the kavanas, the proper intentions during davening, right? Break down the gates. Break them down with sincere teshuvah and sincere joy, and with that joy that we have, we can break down all the barriers. And I think that's what the Rebbe sees with Mashiach coming, the absolute joy of the reunion with God, the third temple, and imparting that vision to us to be able to be joyous in the hardest of occasions, but to absolutely be there and celebrate and be able to be joyous in the most difficult occasions. I saw recently on a military chat, someone had posted a picture, this person and the other person together, and forwarding, say hello to so-and-so. And they mentioned that they're currently at SEER school. SEER is the survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, right? And someone, the next comment on the chat was, "You can't be at SEER school, you're smiling." And I think that's the error. The error is, no, if you're gonna make it through the toughest of times, if you're gonna make it through the worst of challenges, the way to do that is to bring in simcha, to bring in joy, to find joy in the simplest of moments, to find joy within yourself when it doesn't even exist out there, to tap into that and bring that resource in. And because you have that joy, God corresponds as well. He brings that back as well. And I think, Zev, it goes back to what you were talking about, even with patience, right? You've got to be able to instill a smile or at least an empathy in the darkest of moments.
And hope.
Hope.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I would also use a smile, and my patients would tell me that they would always feel more comfortable and confident in the treatment plan because I was smiling for them.
And that hope that they have can also bring on some divine blessings that come with it.
Hate to say this, but I think I heard this on Harry Potter one time. Joy can be found in the darkest of moments.
Hey, science fiction and fantasy, they follow real life.
Yeah.
That's why people relate to it and enjoy it, because it stretches things pretty wildly sometimes, but the journey is still the same. The journey is still the same. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to conquering the next chapter together as well.
Thank you.